Good afternoon and welcome to Efficiency for Access's live Q&A, How do Off-Grid Appliances Enhance Climate Resilience? As many of you know, Efficiency for Access is a global coalition that promotes affordable, high-performing appliances that enable clean energy access for the world's poorest people. Before I hand over to our chair, Jeffrey Prins, I would like to go over a few things so you know how to participate in today's live Q&A. You have joined using the computer's speaker system by default. If you would like to join using the telephone, just click the little phone icon on your attendee control panel and the dial-in information will be displayed. If at any point during the webinar you're experiencing sound difficulties, please let us know by dropping a message in the chat tab located on your attendee control panel, and a member of the team will try to assist you. You will have the opportunity to submit test questions at any time during the webinar through the questions tab also located on the control panel. We will address any questions at the end of the presentation. The event hashtag is Resilient Appliances and the Efficiency for Access Twitter handle is on each slide of the presentation. The chair and speaker's Twitter handles are on the speakers page. And over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, good day, and thank you very much for joining Efficiency for Access's live Q&A titled, How do Off-Grid Appliances Enhance Climate Resilience? My name is Jeffrey Prins, and I head the Renewable Energy portfolio at the IKEA Foundation. We co-chair the Efficiency for Access Coalition alongside the UK's Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, better known to me at least for DFID or UK Aid. And really kudos to DFID for opening up this coalition to others. If you haven't joined yet and you're interested in joining, please check with us. Even if you're not funding, it's interesting to be aligned with the Efficiency for Access Coalition. Today's event will explore how affordable, high-performing appliances can facilitate clean energy access for households in resource-constrained settings and enhance their resilience to growing threat of climate change. In layman's terms, that basically means that efficiency makes solar go further. It's like a 50% cost reduction, and efficiency can ensure that solar is 8 times more powerful when it's doing. So today we will explore how off-grid appliances can help end users respond to external shocks such as COVID-19, and examine how the energy access sector can improve its carbon footprint. This event will comprise of first a moderated session, panel session or discussion, and a Q&A with our audience. Before setting the scene though, I'd like to warmly welcome our panel of experts. First of all, we're delighted to have Dr. Joni Cook, who is Research Administrator of the MEX program, which stands for Modern Energy Cooking Services. Joni manages communications for MEX. It's close to £40 million UK aid funded program, which aims to break out of business as usual approaches and rapidly accelerate the transition from biomass to clean cooking on a global scale. It's something I think we're all looking at, given the fact that it affects close to 3 billion people. And it's just bizarre how we can talk about traveling to Mars and we still haven't solved clean cooking yet. So Joni is an ecologist by training. She brings a research background focusing on climate change and air pollution impacts on ecosystems to the renewable energy sector. So welcome, Joni. I hope I did the proper introduction, but correct me later if I made some mistakes. We also welcome Dan Hamza-Goodacre, non-executive director at KCEP, which stands for Kigali Cooling and Efficiency Program. It's from Climate Works. Thanks for joining us as well. Dan is a climate and environment strategist and advisor currently working for KCEP, as I said, and the COP26 high-level climate champions team, which will take place next year, if I'm correct. Dan has managed various multi-million-dollar global climate programs, written climate change policies for governments across the world, and led various climate change campaigns. Again, a big welcome to you. And in addition, we welcome Habiba Ali, CEO of Sosai. I hope I say that right as well. Habiba has worked in renewable energy industry since 2005. Sosai, the company she leads, is currently empowering communities and businesses with solar technologies ranging from rooftop solar panels, solar home systems, and 10 kilowatt microgrids for communities, solar dryers, and integrated energy centers. Finally, we welcome Tracy Dolan, Head of Knowledge Management, EEP Africa. Tracy Dolan manages knowledge, communications, and partnerships for EEP Africa, an early stage clean energy fund operating in Southern and East Africa. EEP Africa currently has 45 innovative projects in active implementation and has financed almost 250 projects since its launch in 2010. So that was my introduction. It's a lot of reading from paper. Apologies for that. We don't know each other intimately, so we have to do it this way. Now, getting on to the next section, which is the scene setting presentation, which we'll be diving more into with the Q&A in our esteemed panel. There's a few points that we can make here. One is off-grid appliances can help households in low to middle income countries gain renewable energy access, adapt to the effect of climate change, and reduce their vulnerability to disruptions such as COVID-19. So again, a few examples here. Solar water pumps, for example, present a clean energy solution for irrigation during droughts. They also expand seasonal growing cycles, which can provide households with more predictable income to pay for education and save for emergencies, thus reducing their susceptibility to external shocks. Another example is solar-powered fans. They're affordable, low-carbon emitting appliance that can help people to be more productive despite high temperatures. And according to the Efficiency for Access recent report, the socioeconomic impact of super efficient off-grid fans in Bangladesh, 44% of survey respondents said that they enjoy 3 hours or more a day of extra production time with their fan. And I had a chance to read this study. It's quite shocking. Every degree temperature rise in Celsius clearly lowers cognitive function. So we're much less productive if we're not cooled down. Another example is our health clinics. They also depend on reliable and efficient refriges to store medication and vaccines. And of course, that will be crucial in deploying the COVID-19 vaccine once it comes to the market effectively. Another example using of some of the benefits, using distributed renewables and solar powered appliances can also create a model for delivery of affordable and reliable energy services that does not depend on fossil fuels. So while the social economic impact of off-grid appliances is beyond a doubt, the energy access sector also needs to be mindful of the carbon footprint. The case in example is often people, if they don't have energy access or the access is there, they rely on fossil fuel backup generators as the only source of power. And according to a recent IFC report on Nigeria and Ghana, backup generators release as much as 100 megatons of CO2 in the atmosphere each year, which is on par with the emissions of a country like Sweden or the Netherlands, where I'm living right now. Distributed solar and storage technologies also offer a pathway away from this backup generator dependency. And then further, if we look at e-waste, it's also becoming an emerging issue in the energy access sector as it grows. And despite the rapid and significant increase in the sale of household solar systems over the past decade, in sub-Saharan Africa, efforts to recapture and recycle e-waste are nascent, it's very early and particularly challenging. The Resilient African Network's recent qualitative study of off-grid solar markets across Senegal and Uganda revealed that consumers currently have little guidance on proper solar e-waste disposal, nor a clear understanding on the risks involved in local disposal. E-waste recycling facilities in Senegal and Uganda are also limited due to the undeveloped supply chains and limited processing capacity. The USAID and UK aid funded Global LEAP Award Solar E-Waste Innovation Challenge will make $1.6 million available in grant funding to support innovations in e-waste management for the off-grid sector in sub-Saharan Africa. There is also a clear need to minimize emissions across the product life cycle, or I would say the product life, the use of a product, because I don't think products live, but there's a clear need to minimize emissions in the use of a product in manufacturing and the end of its use. So for example, high global warming potential refrigerants are released in the atmosphere when refrigerants are disposed of inappropriately. And those were the points that I needed to make for the introduction. It's a little bit of staccato list of things. If you're interested in reading more into this, just let us know. I'm going to transition now after this 10-minute introduction to set the scene to our panel. So if you can all join again, panelists. I'm missing Dan. Yes. So apologies for the long introduction and the staccato dry setting the scene. We get into questions to you all. The first question I have is, how can off-grid appliances help enhance climate change mitigation and adaptation? Can you give examples from your own area of work expertise? And I'd like to start with Habiba.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. So talking about how off-grid appliances can help with climate change mitigation, I mean, you just mentioned earlier in your introduction about how much energy we are getting from generators in Nigeria and Ghana. I've heard that Nigeria generates about 13.5 kilowatts of energy from generators, and what we get from the 13,500 kilowatts from generators, and what we get from the national grid is just about 4,000 megawatts. So we're getting more energy from generators, and you can imagine the amount of emission if a gallon of diesel actually emits 2.9 tons of CO2 per annum. Then if you put that all together, and the emissions from Nigeria is actually really rising, and you're right to say it can actually equate with the Annex 1 countries. So basically, off-grid appliances can actually help to reduce that a great deal. And currently what we are doing is we're deploying solutions like solar home kits, solar for small businesses. And what you find, and I will speak from the rural area perspective, because this is where I mostly work. 90% of our work is in the rural communities of Nigeria. And what you find is you find small businesses that are using these small generators to power and do maybe to cool drinks or to charge phones, most importantly. So you can imagine, just because somebody wants to have a business charging phones for maybe 5 hours, they turn on this generator and they can use at least a minimum of 10 gallons of fuel per day. So basically, we try to replace such solutions with a certain patented technology that we have with in partnership with independent energy based in Haarlem in the Netherlands. And what we do, the system is called an Easy. It's actually a solar solution, so a solar powered solution, but just like well packaged in a box. And we replace such businesses with that kind of box, depending on the size of generator they were using. If they were using a 1 kilowatt one, we try to replace that with a 1 kilowatt solution as well. And you can imagine that immediately cuts out all of that emission already from the atmosphere. Another thing that we currently do is also in the climate resilience part is we try to also reduce post-harvest loss, because there's a lot of productive activity in the farming, in the agricultural sector in northern Nigeria, where I'm based and where I will do a lot of my work. And especially fruits, crops like tomatoes, perishable crops, peppers, and all of that. Most times when the farmers actually harvest and they have them available, the thing that happens next is if they don't get buyers immediately, they lose out on that. And sometimes they actually leave them in dump sites, and that's also creating some sort of emission. So the work that we do that also tries to address that is that we're preferring solar dryers, solar powered dryers. And these dryers are reducing, at least all of the emissions that would have happened, because now they can dry this produce and actually package them well. And it's becoming very interesting now, because we recently got a grant from the from PropCom. It's a DFID funded grant, and it's to actually reduce post-harvest loss. And we're deploying about 20 units of the solar dryers across 3 states in Nigeria. Most of these things also, one of the things that really excites me is that we're using our work to also address other things besides just climate change. We're addressing gender equality, because we also support women who want to run businesses. We call it powered by Sosai businesses. We give them like solutions like refrigerators, where they can actually own a refrigerator and sell, cold stuff, drinks. I mean, Northern Nigeria is a very hot place, so we have a very little time in the year where it's actually cool. So most of the time, people want to have cold drinks and all of that. And these are solutions that would not be in the communities if we didn't have solar solutions to power them. And now we give the women and allow them to pay over time. It's like a leasehold agreement. We do solar kiosks, and so we're also promoting gender equality and ensuring economic empowerment for the women in rural northern Nigeria. Ordinarily, these are women who cannot go out of their houses or their community, or far away from their locations due to the cultural and religious issues that we have around here. So imagine a woman now has a fridge in her house that she can sell cold drinks, and people know she has constantly cold drinks, and that really helps. So the delivery of energy access is actually in these remote areas is also ensuring economic growth, like I said, and helping people to purchase household appliances. We're deploying solar-powered mini grids, 10 kilowatts and above, and people in the communities normally who wouldn't have access to energy in their households now have access to energy, and that ensures that they are buying appliances like televisions and all the other appliances that make them feel like, in Nigerian parlance, we call it "I have arrived," like improvement in their social status. And for me, what really excites me about this is we're able to have, we're also thinking about doing solutions that will ensure communities have, internet, so that they can have their children also, getting information. But then if we can't do internet immediately because of the kind of communication deficiency that we have, then the children can actually have television, and through television, a lot of knowledge can come from that, and information can be spread through that. So there's a lot we can actually say that off-grid appliances can do for people in the communities besides just climate, but heavily it's also reducing a great deal the climate effects.
Thanks, Habiba. It's really interesting how you highlight the use of diesel gensets, and I referred to the IFC report. It's called Dirty Footprint of a Broken Grid. It's worthwhile reading. And also Access to Energy Institute did a follow-on or a related study looking at the economics of replacing diesel genset. And clearly, in one of your examples, you say sort of the in-the-box solution, there is a clear replacement for that. So that's very interesting in how you highlight post-harvest loss and the role for women entrepreneurs. Just wanted to ask the other panelists as well if they can give an example of how off-grid appliances help enhance climate change mitigation adaptation. And I'd like to ask Joni for a response on that.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I'd just like to emphasise the direct link between a global transition to clean cooking and the protection of the world's forest ecosystems. Protecting the world's forests is crucial for maximising resilience and mitigation in the face of the climate crisis. Forests help to stabilise the climate, regulate ecosystems, provide fresh water and healthy soils, protect biodiversity, play an integral part in the carbon cycle, and help to support livelihoods. According to a recent report by the IUCN, halting the loss and degradation of natural systems and promoting their restoration have the potential to contribute over 1/3 of the total climate change mitigation required by 2030. Traditional methods of cooking using biomass, such as wood and charcoal as fuel, is a leading driver of global deforestation and degradation. Over 50% of all wood harvested worldwide is used as fuel, and an estimated 30% of this is unsustainably sourced. Developing countries are the main contributors, with up to 75% of wood fuel harvested used for cooking, heating and lighting. By accelerating the global transition from using biomass as fuel to modern energy cooking solutions, such as through driving innovation in clean cooking appliances used in off-grid contexts, we can substantially reduce global biomass demand, contributing towards reducing deforestation rates and forest degradation, and therefore build and maintain healthy ecosystems for supporting community resilience under future climate change scenarios. So I'd just like to highlight two specific examples of how MEX collaborations are driving innovation in the off-grid appliances sector. The first is the recent MEX collaboration with Facera, an organisation which has been working to deliver clean energy access since 2011. This MEX Challenge Fund project resulted in the development and testing of a solar-powered e-cooking device specifically for rural communities' cooking needs in East Africa. The solar e-cooking device will be used to cook beans and rice and function like a slow cooker and is powered entirely by the sun with an energy-stored battery system. This means that it can be used in the evening and throughout the night. This device will help customers make cleaner and more efficient choices for cooking. This is particularly important for changing perspectives of rural communities to view off-grid appliances as a permanent, cost-effective solution and not just an intermediate option. It's important that we provide energy-efficient, high-quality, clean cooking appliances that match the standard of leading energy-efficient appliances available for the mains grid sector. The second example is the recent research completed by Caccioni LLC, also funded by a MEX Challenge Fund grant. This project developed and tested a new business model for making off-grid solar electric cooking affordable and accessible for some of the lowest income households in Malawi, specifically rural subsistence farming households. This pay-as-you-grow business model enables households to purchase components for a small modular solar electric cooking system incrementally when cash is available after crop harvest, whereby capacity can be built up over several years. This model therefore avoids the financing and monitoring costs of monthly or weekly payments of pay-as-you-go business models. It also has the additional environmental benefits of being direct drive solar design, which means that no battery is required and therefore the environmental impacts associated with heavy metal battery components are avoided.
Okay, thanks, Joni. Quite a bit of information there too. Always strikes me that clean cooking, we don't really often think about the carbon impact, especially with the forestry. So I'm glad you mentioned that. I think even Rwanda has put the forestry issue under the Ministry of Defense, and clean cooking is such a big driver there. But you do mention, you know, the use of wood for lighting and cooking, and some of the work you've done through MEX. Very interesting. You don't mention carbon black, but maybe we'll touch on that later. But off to Tracy with some examples perhaps as well to let everybody react.
Hi, Jeff. Thank you very much. And very interesting to listen to Habiba and Joni and the work they're doing. A lot of overlap, I think, between all of the different types of work that we each are doing with our organizations. I think one thing that I would like to mention with EP Africa, so we're a clean energy financing facility, and much of the focus has been on enhancing energy access and climate mitigation through reduction of greenhouse gas emissions. And what we've been seeing in recent years is both clean energy producers taking a value chain approach to their work and adding more productive use of energy into as a core part of their business model, as opposed to just an add-on to energy generation. And I could maybe use as an example energy supplier, Absolute Energy, that created built a mini grid, installed a mini grid on an island in Lake Victoria. This was a fishing community that had no access to electricity before this, was completely off grid. But in addition to building the mini grid, which powered the entire community on the island, they also installed fish processing facilities, so solar drying facilities, and an ice making machine and cold storage. So they really looked at the entire value chain of the fishing community and where clean energy could be used in terms of generation or appliances or other things to support the community in a variety of ways. And in addition to the direct value chain of the fishing, they also, because of the electricity, many small businesses were able to start, many entrepreneurs. They did some training for small and micro entrepreneurs who started businesses of, refrigeration, as Habiba was talking about, just selling cold drinks or tailoring with sewing machines, electric sewing machines, ironing, a whole variety of businesses built up around this. And so this mini grid not only replaced a generator. There had prior to this, about 24% of the town's electricity came from a diesel generator. That was completely stopped use. About another 14% came from kerosene lamps. That was reduced to about 3% of energy use. So it significantly offset polluting forms of energy. It also sped up productivity because the fish drying was much more efficient than just sun drying in the sun naturally. It reduced food loss, reduced waste from food loss, and created new income generating opportunities for the community. So, this clean energy company, rather than just building the mini grid and walking away, looked at the community's needs and looked at the full value chain. And I think we're seeing that more and more because it's also a sustainable business model for the mini grid developer. One of the problems with mini grids right now is that they haven't found a financially viable long-term model in many cases. And by taking this value chain approach to it, they not only have greatly increased the adaptation, resilience, and mitigation impact in a positive way, but they also are supporting their core business and the viability of their business. So I think that's one of the best examples from our portfolio.
Thanks, Tracy. I really like how you emphasize the user-centered approach, how it serves the fishers, the community of fishers, and some good examples of how diesel and kerosene is replaced while creating a value add, which is income and money in the pocket of those that deserve it most. Dan, do you have an example as well?
Hi, Jeffrey. Yep, I do. And actually, the first thing I'd say, echoing Tracy, is it's great to hear the complementarity of the work that's going on. And my focus right now is quite specifically on cooling, and it's a key energy service. Most people don't want energy just for the sake of energy, and when we talk about energy efficiency, again, it doesn't really excite many people if you talk about it in the abstract. It's like, for what? For what do we want to use energy more efficiently? And they are things like cooking, and they are things like staying cool. So I mean, the question, how does off-grid help mitigation and adaptation? I mean, you've all mentioned some of these already. From a human perspective, thermal comfort's critical, in particular in these times when the climate is changing and heat stress is more common. So, super efficient off-grid fans, very helpful. They also don't use very polluting F gases, which have high global warming potential, sometimes thousands of times worse than CO2. Fans are typically in the top sort of 5 appliances that in an off-grid solar package. Fridges, they've also been mentioned. I mean, you got them at the residential level. Some of the super insulated ones can really keep food safe and nutritious for many days, even when there's a power cut. They're that efficient. Incredibly helpful. Not using F gases, helping on the mitigation front. Cold storage, that's been mentioned when one thinks about it from a commercial agricultural level. You've got some large cold storage hubs. Seen some really cool ones in Rwanda, ones that can just sort of click together and grow depending on how much they need to keep cool. Almost like it's like a community cooperative approach that can adjust depending on how much needs to be kept cool. So I think they're solar powered, they're super efficient as well. So lots of benefits there from a mitigation perspective, and then from an adaptation perspective. I mean, you mentioned, Jeffrey, the statistic about productivity at work. The hotter it gets, the less able we are to be productive. Yeah, it matters at work. It matters when we're resting, it matters when we're playing as well. So, you know, thermal comfort to avoid heat stress and heat strokes is critical as we adapt to a changing climate. Cold storage as well, in order to keep food safe and nutritious, and also to help keep crops in a state which captures the maximum value in the market and reduces the pressure on a farmer to be beholden to the person they're selling to, because they have to sell at a particular time, because otherwise they can't keep their produce in the state that commands the highest price. So all of these things are helpful. For us as an organization, the Kigali Cooling Efficiency Program at ClimateWorks, we're working on really all of these issues in partnership with WWF in Tanzania, in particular with the fishing community. A lot of the catch is seasonal, or even during the day. You know, if you can't look after fish in terms of temperature, then we all know pretty soon you don't want to eat it, so you don't want to go near it. We've worked also, I should flag, with Sustainable Energy for All to quantify how many people don't have access to cooling, very similar to the work that was done years ago on access to energy. And we quantified about 1 billion people are at high risk from a lack of access to cooling, and around 2.3 billion are also at risk. The billion at most risk are those typically off-grid, and there are some passive cooling solutions that can help, but they're often suboptimal in the face of extreme temperatures. So please have a look at their report, Chilling Prospects, if you haven't seen that. Also to flag, we've been working with the Ashton Awards to help identify some developing country-led solutions, and also to try and scale them through a recently launched Fair Cooling Fund, which is supporting initiatives like Ecos and cold hubs in India, Sea Balance, which is about slum cooling, also in India, PEG Africa, and eConsult in Egypt. And then just the final thing to say is that actually with a ClimateWorks hat on many years ago, I worked with CLASP, the Collaborative Labeling Appliance Standards Program, to help improve the testing of off-grid appliances, because the efficiency or even the quality and the durability of those appliances isn't subject to the same rigor as a lot of the appliances that are used on grid. And I hope those efforts are carrying on. That was many years ago we started that, but that's critical so that consumers can rely on the products that they buy. Thank you.
Thanks, Dan. That program that you're referring to is now called Vera Sol. It's a quality assurance program looking at productive use appliances as well. So thanks very much for these examples in the cooling sector. I never forget, I visited a school in Ahmedabad, close to a slum area, and the kids were no longer studying in a 55°C classroom, but a 20° classroom. So cold storage is so important for, you know, adapting to climate change, but also investing in children's future. So thank you very much for these examples. I have a few questions. Unfortunately, we won't be able to ask all the questions, I think, because we have about 10 minutes until we get to the Q&A with the audience. I'd like to turn to Joni from, you know, the MEX program, which is very much focused on clean cooking, and you mentioned some innovations there. So the most recent tracking report on how we're doing with clean cooking says that about 2.8 billion people still lack access to clean cooking. And you mentioned a few innovations, but what other innovations has the MEX program identified that will help close that gap? You talked about e-cooking, often seen as sort of an urban solution. I think you just mentioned the pay-as-you-grow, which is more of a rural solution. Could you highlight a few things there, please?
Yeah, thanks, Jeffrey. I think it's important to break down the figure of 2.8 billion and examine the energy access situation in more detail here. So most of these people, about 2 billion, have access to electricity but don't currently have access to clean cooking. These can be further divided into those who have access to reliable mains grid electricity and those that have access to unreliable electricity, such as mini-grids. About 790 million of these 2.8 billion don't have access to electricity at all. At MEX, we are working closely with collaborators across the world to identify innovations for accelerating the transition to modern energy cooking services for all three of these categories of energy end users. So just to give an example for each type, to enhance access to clean cooking for those that already have access to reliable electricity through mains grids, we are working with Burn Manufacturing based in Kenya to develop and pilot an electric pressure cooker for Kenyan and sub-Saharan Africa markets. So Burn is poised to capture a vastly underserved market in electric pressure cookers within Kenya and sub-Saharan Africa. With 470 million expected to gain access to electricity by 2030, there is considerable opportunity to provide a low-cost and low-emissions electric cooking solution. However, current EPC designs are not adapted to the current challenges of the sub-Saharan Africa grid, such as brownouts, blackouts, and inconsistent voltage. Burn has identified several key technological features to accommodate for this weak and grid context. Burn will build on its current 23 home pilots and develop these guaranteed perfect meal EPC features, thereby preparing for the commercialization of a revolutionary made in Kenya electric cooking solution. So secondly, to focus on accelerating the transition to clean cooking for those that currently don't have access to electricity. One example of our collaboration in this area is with SCODE. That's the Sustainable Community Development Services, which is an NGO based in Kenya. This project evaluated the potential of whether cooking with electricity can be feasible in off-grid circumstances. The project was an early feasibility study of the use of direct current solar electric pressure cookers with households based in 2 remote rural communities based in Nakuru County in Kenya. The project assessed the affordability of the DC unit based on the income levels of potential users. This is particularly important as off-grid electricity access is currently less economically viable than mains grid electricity, predominantly because energy storage is required in the evenings. Rural communities also tend to have a wider affordability gap than those living in urban grid-connected areas. And finally, to focus on those that have access to unreliable electricity, such as those connected to mini-grids, MEX has recently provided funding for 14 electric cooking outreach, that's eco projects, to stimulate innovations in modern energy cooking technology, processes and services in low-income countries, with a specific focus on mini-grid related technology and appliances. And we'd encourage you to check the MEX website where regular updates of project progress and outputs will be featured.
Thanks, Joni. Interesting how you categorize the 3 customer or the 3 target groups into weak grid, no grid, and unreliable grids. Thank you very much for that. I have a question now for Habiba. The question I have is, what can we do to empower consumers in their use of off-grid appliances? So I think a lot of times we just assume that it's an efficient appliance, but and it's a DC powered appliance, but that's not always the case, is it?
Yeah, it's not always the case, and this is why at Sosai one of the things that we focus on is basically to use design thinking models to find out from consumers what it is they actually do want and what it is they really that will fit their needs. I mean, there's a lot of innovation out there. I keep saying innovation is only as good as the impact that it makes. And if you have all these fancy products, fancy technologies out there, and then you bring it to the communities and it's not practicable for them to use it, then it's actually as good as you've wasted, I mean, all the effort and all everything that you needed. And I've seen a lot, I mean, tens of technologies like that have come in, have actually almost like, you know, forced it down our throat to try it out in the community. And I always stop them and say, you know what, let us first do a pilot with it and then hear from the communities what it is that they want and if the product, the technology actually fits their situation and if it is answering to a problem that they have. One of the major things that we forget is the why. And it's very easy for us to forget the why because you want to sell, right? Everybody seems to be selling one renewable energy technology or the other, and everybody wants to do this fancy technology that is going to answer to everybody's problems. And I remember when about 8 years ago when I was really going to go into like the home kits space, I thought about manufacturing as well. And I went all the way to China, I sat down with some companies and designed products and came back. And as soon as I brought it in, I found out that it was actually a bit heavier than the ones that were available in the market from Barefoot, from Green Light Planners and D-Light. And I thought, why would I waste my time when there's already so much products out there? Why don't we find a way to get it to the people that need it? And that's where the work is. And that's how my business model actually surfaced. So we now, just don't take products. We actually take, a variety of products to the communities, and we're like, test it out and try it and see, does it answer? I mean, and this is always after we have done a baseline study with the community or had a focus group discussion to discuss with them. Sometimes some communities, energy is not even their priority need. We've gone to communities where we've sat down with them and had a discussion, and they say, if only we can get a hospital. And that's their priority need. And once you're able to cross that hurdle, then they start thinking, what else? And so you always want to make sure that whatever the technology you're preferring is always the type that they want and the one that's practicable for use. And I will say this again, because we've done a lot of cook stoves. We've done over 60,000 improved cook stoves using under the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, CDM project. And during my cook stove project deployment projects at times, one of the things we found, and we had to change from one cook stove to the other in partner with our partners, because first we started with a certain cook stove. Maybe the stove top is not large enough. Northern Nigeria is known for large families. We have one man can have 4 wives and 5 children per wife and maybe 40-member household, and so that was an issue. So we had to redesign the stove tech stove then into, I think that's now the EcoZoom Durand. We actually redesigned the stove top to fit larger pots. And by the time you prefer this solution to the communities, they like it. Then there are stoves that come and are like camp gases, and they want you to use it in rural northern Nigeria. It's not just going to work. And then you try to explain to them that this is not going to work, and the manufacturers are just adamant. My stove saves 90% of, yeah, it does, it's fantastic, it's a good product, but then it has to fit the need. So we don't also want to be the ones preferring solutions that turn out to be trophies in the homes. A lot of times, doing a CDM project, you have to have regular verification exercises happening every year. And it's quite embarrassing when you go back. In the beginning of our stove work, we go back to the houses and then we find this nice, well-packaged C80 stove on the shelf, have never been touched, still in its plastic wrapping and everything. And then the verifier is just beside you from maybe TUVNOD or DNV, and it's very, that's already like a leakage and a fallout of the project. So one of the things we should always do I feel that we should always do is involve the beneficiaries of these technologies in our design and deployment, even the deployment, because sometimes, I remember when I started, I wanted to work solely with women, but I found out with time that women were not just going to cut it for me when I wanted to travel far, because most women cannot do beyond what their husbands allow them to do. That's the religious instance here. So with the Porter and everything, they can only do within their community. What if they have maximized they have sold to everyone in the community? Then what next, right? So that's why we thought about other solutions of the Powered by Sosai, refrigerators, solar dryers, and solar kiosks. So these women, excuse me, are formed into like cooperatives that maybe of 6 women maximum who manage these technologies, and then they make some money off of it. But with the men, the solutions travel further, like the solar home kits and all of that, they travel further. So I think it's all about, ensuring that whatever solution you're bringing actually solves a problem, and you never forget the reason why you brought that solution, which is that why and that problem. And once you solve it, it doesn't mean you should also disengage yourself from your beneficiaries. You also need to keep thinking, what else can I do for you? And I think that's the stage at which Sosai is at.
Habiba, thanks so much for your answer. I think it's so key to look at what the user wants and can afford, and so I think those are very wise words. I would add something implicit in your response too, is that local entrepreneurship and local talent can really best tap into the serving user needs. So I'd like to highlight that as well, which was implicit in your answer. Thank you very much. It reminds me of when a clean cooking company said to their customers, yeah, you should cook beans with the lid on because it's more efficient, but no one wanted to do that because beans taste better with the lid off. So
yeah.
Thank you very much.
And then some of them, you want to be cooking and multitasking, but then you have to sit there and be feeding the fire, and no woman wants to do that.
No. Moving on to Tracy again. So EEP Africa is currently undertaking a research study that examines clean energy and climate change adaptation. What do the initial findings reveal, and what are the implications for off-grid appliances and the energy access sectors more broadly?
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. Maybe I can just explain a little bit about what EEP Africa does. We're an early stage clean energy financer. So most of our projects, or the majority of our projects, are in the pilot or demonstration phase. And we really target trying to identify innovative technologies or business models, or introducing energy access to new markets or energy appliances to new markets. So a majority of our portfolio companies are startup companies. We also have a very strong preference for local companies and women-led companies to try and stimulate innovation in the region. We have generally focused on energy access and climate mitigation, as I said. But as more and more energy developers focus on productive use of energy, we recently did our latest call for proposals this year in 2020, focused on productive use of energy and circular economy solutions. And we got over 350 applications for this that we found incredibly interesting and innovative and diverse projects, because we work in 15 different countries and we're technology agnostic. So we cover many clean cooking projects, cook stoves and biomass and biofuels. We cover waste to energy, solar PV, hydropower, wind power. So there's quite a diversity. And we realized that if you look at our whole portfolio of projects over the past 10 years, that we had been tracking climate mitigation, but we hadn't really been looking at the adaptation and resilience impacts. And so we wanted to take a look at that. And that's what the study that will be coming out in November looks at. It examines projects in our portfolio over the past decade and identifies those co-benefits of clean energy and mitigation projects and how they're benefiting in adaptation and resilience. So some of the areas we identified sort of three key themes that recur throughout the portfolio. One of them was in the example I mentioned before of promoting agricultural resilience and strengthening local value chains. So that example on the island in Uganda with a solar mini grid that also powered fish processing and ice making. This would also include solar irrigation projects, which we have seen a huge increase in our applications in recent years. Cold chain technology, as Dan was talking about, some really interesting innovations. Cold chain, everything from small boxes that can transport dairy on the back of bicycles from farms to markets to large cold storage rooms that can be used by an entire community or a market, community market. So that's very interesting. So that's one area. And then the second area that we've seen is in the sort of theme of supporting soil and land management practices and watershed protection. So this is some of our waste to energy projects and our biogas projects where they're creating organic fertilizer. Certainly in the clean cooking space where it's reducing pressure on forests, reducing degradation of forests by developing alternative fuel or cook stoves, as you mentioned. And then some of the hydropower, we're funding mostly small hydropower, run-of-the-river hydro that really takes the community needs into account. And some of these are developing, for example, small industrial parks next to the hydro plant to stimulate local businesses. Or another project recently is a hydropower plant was set up and they are now introducing electric cook stoves into that community, which now has access to electricity that they didn't before. So a lot of those are interlinked. The third theme that we see recurring is building self-resilience and resilient infrastructure. So obviously mini grids in general do that also by supporting, one mini grid covering a town can electrify the school, the health clinic, as well as households and small businesses. But we're also seeing this resilient infrastructure through a battery as a service model and solar. I think Joni mentioned, or Habiba mentioned, solar kiosks before. So we're seeing solar community hubs where they power, the area right around the hub, but then they also are charging batteries that have sufficient power to electrify small appliances and can really reach that last mile community by being a recharging station for a much wider area than could be covered by a mini grid. And so that introduces the opportunity for resilient appliances, adaptation appliances, and economic opportunities to a much broader audience. And then finally, I think I mentioned solar irrigation and cold chain. We see a big increase in recent years in terms of at least the applications that are coming into EP Africa. The other area that's very exciting is e-mobility. We're currently funding one project in Uganda that is introducing electric bodabodas, motorcycle taxis in Kampala, and recharging stations, solar recharging stations for those. And in our latest call that focused on productive use of energy, we saw a diversity of e-mobility projects from about 6 different countries in Southern and East Africa. They covered everything from motorbikes or bicycles to fishing boats on Lake Victoria, electric fishing boats, to 4x4 off-road vehicles that could be used for tourism or for humanitarian purposes. So there's really such a diversity of innovative ideas that are coming out. And one thing we do as EP Africa is that we take those early risks. These are projects that need to demonstrate that the technology works and need to test those technology. The case of the electric bodabodas in Uganda, the first model of their bike was a model that was used in China, and it wasn't appropriate to Kampala's roads. They needed to up the power a little bit, and they needed to rejigger it. And so that's one of the things we can do with grant financing, is help them have that breathing room to test and pilot their model, demonstrate its effectiveness, and then hopefully go on and secure private sector investors to grow the business to something more sustainable.
Thanks, Tracy. It sounds like you have a wealth of knowledge built up from all these pilots and startups and maybe some failures along the way as well. So
that happens too.
Clear,
yep.
Yeah. So clear co-benefits, as you say, in adaptation resilience. To keep the conversation going, Dan, a question for you. Given the threats posed by climate change and COVID-19, where do you see challenges and opportunities for off-grid cooling solutions?
Thanks, Jeffrey. Yeah, with COVID, perhaps more challenges than opportunities, but thinking positively, I think we have the solutions. So maybe the opportunity is in how this COVID catastrophe can sharpen attention for some of the challenges that many of us have been working on for a long time. But 3 specific points. The first is very specifically the challenge in relation to health and healthcare facilities, in the need for cooling to keep patients comfortable. We've all seen pictures of lots of people lying in large halls on beds, and in many parts of the world they're not lying there in a heat wave, but many parts of the world they are. And if, in particular, if you're thinking about clinics and sort of rural areas where buildings don't necessarily have great thermal comfort, then there's a need to make sure that patients are not just comfortable, but they're not in a sort of critical condition. So patients, and then also medicines, of course, they need to be kept in reasonably stable conditions in order to be effective. So refrigeration as well as space cooling, important. And then, of course, this question of a vaccine, which may or may not be universal. There may be more than one vaccine. Who knows when it will come? But if and when something like that does come, then the big task is really to disseminate that around the world, in particular to get that out to last or first mile communities, because they'll be the ones where it's harder to get the vaccine to in a stable condition. That has to be kept within 4 degrees, I think, Celsius. It's a small range, otherwise it spoils and then it doesn't work. So a particular role there around the health. Secondly, and I guess really related to that, is the challenge of people sheltering in place, at home typically. And again, some of those people are in very hot parts of the world, and some of those people are in buildings which have a really poor thermal envelope, and they're stuck at home. And hopefully they do have a fan, and hopefully they have an opportunity to try and keep cool. But efficiency is key there to helping them ensure they can receive the energy services they need in order to stay comfortable while they're sheltering in place. And interestingly, but not so much off-grid, the analysis of energy use in Delhi showed that over a couple of months during the peak COVID lockdown, air conditioning demand kept energy demand, overall energy demand, at near normal levels, because people were sheltering in place and it was so hot they just whacked up the air conditioners. So that's more of an on-grid problem than an off-grid, given that not many people have an air conditioner off-grid, but it does show you the critical situation that has existed with people sheltering in place and needing to stay thermally comfortable. And then the third area is cold chains, which has come up a few times. And this is a global problem. So it's impacting in communities in rural areas, but also even through to cities, is the disruption to traditional markets and supply chains for food. And we've seen large demand for the transportation of food, and the number of employees. I mean, there's bad news about COVID mostly, but the number of jobs that have been created driving food around, the number of jobs that have been created in supermarkets. Also disruption to markets at the local level, whether that's in Africa or India, and creating greater demand for cold storage at home, whether that's your space in your refrigerator, whether that's cold storage for farmers in order to keep that produce in a state that can capture the value that's needed at a marketplace. So a real need for domestic and commercial refrigeration. It's got to be efficient, ideally using renewable energy, ideally using low or no global warming potential refrigerants. Those solutions are more important than ever.
Thanks, Dan. I mean, the charm with decentralized renewable energy is, that it can be brought to the doorstep of those that need it the most. So rural settings, health care facilities, why make them travel to the city when it can be brought to them? So I like the examples that you give. Thank you very much. Now I get to return to all the panelists again with a general question. We have focused most of the discussion until now on how appliances can help households minimize their emissions and become more resilient. But how can the sector improve its carbon footprint? And I'd like to go through the panelists, each one by one, starting with Dan, circling back to you.
I love this question, and actually, Tracy, you already mentioned batteries as a service. So we're looking at cooling as a service, and the concept of farmers being able to pay per tray of agricultural produce that has been harvested, because refrigeration isn't needed all year round. Lots of products are seasonal, can be too expensive to cover that initial capital outlay. And so I think the more that we can move to these circular economy approaches to appliances, whether that's a fridge, whether that's a fan, whether that's a cooker, frankly, even a TV. Frankly, I would love to think that we could even have a kitchen as a service in our modernized world. Like, why do you need to own your kitchen? You can't take it with you when you die. Who cares? It's going to break, right? Get somebody else to fix it for you. Why can't we have kitchen as a service, or everything really as a service? And then you create the kind of directives that you see in Europe and other countries with the eco design, so that you can't just make and sell and then they throw, and that pollutes. That there's a sense of producer responsibility. But if the business model is one where the technology is being leased and the asset therefore is still owned by the company, and they have to come and take it away and do something with it, it can incentivize reuse of the materials that have gone in. And hopefully everyone knows Interface Floor, this very long-standing example of the carpet company. I mean, you take a very standard product like a carpet, and you do something very exciting to it with a circular economy business model, and they did that 30 years ago, and everyone else has been frankly asleep at the wheel in catching up with Interface Floor. So this can apply to appliances. We can cut the e-waste, we can cut the leakage of super polluting F gases that also come out of fridges and air conditioners when they get chucked in rubbish dumps, particularly in Africa and other countries that unfortunately can't stop the tide of this stuff coming in from other parts of the world or control it themselves. So a big thumbs up for circular economy approaches in the appliance industry.
Yeah, great point. The energy guru Amory Lovins always says, at least maybe about men, we only want cold beer and hot showers. How we get it is irrelevant. So energy as a service, or the service focus, is quite good, I think. So Joni, how would you react to that?
Reducing the overall carbon footprint across entire supply chains of clean cooking solutions is critical to improving the carbon footprint of the sector as a whole. For example, by sourcing renewable energy and parts in country where possible. One example of this from our MEX collaborations is Burn Manufacturing based in Kenya. They manufacture electric pressure cookers in their Nairobi factory instead of sourcing appliances from China. I'd also like to highlight the benefits of life cycle analysis, which is an important tool for examining and reducing the carbon footprint of the manufacture of appliance and renewable energy infrastructure components. For example, there are high environmental costs associated with the use of certain critical raw materials, such as aluminium in electric pressure cookers. Our recent work conducted by Jackie Lee explores critical raw materials and their impact on modern energy cooking provision. And we invite you to read the working paper and associated blogs available on the MEX website. The final point is that continuing to bring together and strengthen sector collaborations between private sector, academia, NGOs and political actors is increasingly urgent in light of the first wave of the COVID-19 virus. To reduce the sector's carbon footprint in this respect, it's important to promote innovation in the use of virtual conferences, workshops and meetings to reduce the carbon footprint associated with travel.
Thanks, Joni. Local manufacturing at the Burn company, it was quite interesting to see. It's quite amazing. So some good examples there. And let me go to Habiba with the same question. How can the sector improve its carbon footprint?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that actually takes a lot of energy and people depend on generators a lot for, and you find people using 300 kilowatts of generator, 300 kVA generator, 400 kVA generator is actually manufacturing companies in Nigeria, you know, small manufacturing companies manufacturing like very little. And I keep thinking about how we can have energy efficiency you know, solutions or deployments in these kind of sectors. And you know, there's something that my partners and I are trying to do, and we're seeking funding to do that, is to actually do an audit of some of the companies that use generator a lot. I mean, there's no other source of energy. So if you want to continue in business, you just have to use generators. So you find these people, I mean, that's a lot of emissions and a lot of climate effects happening there. So if we can actually replace such companies' energy requirements with you know, efficient, I mean, there's been stories of these things happening in developed countries where companies actually use hundreds of panels on their roofs to generate the electricity that they need and do most of their manufacturing during the day. So why don't we start thinking that way and finding a way to actually make that work even in Nigeria? And then another thing is a lot of secondary schools, a lot of institutions, let me say not just secondary schools, also use massive amounts of generator for their energy resource, and that can actually be replaced by a solar powered or renewable energy power, some solutions, you know. So it's all about sitting down and doing a very good analysis of this, and you know, finding a way to you know, make this efficient and let the people find replacements that work.
Nice, good examples about sizing and energy management. So again, Access to Energy Institute, what I mentioned before, they have a metering technology. If Habiba, if you're interested in that, I'll connect you with them, because we don't always need the diesel genset that is sold to us, so to speak. But finally, Tracy.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, I can. I also support the local production as one way to reduce the carbon footprint, and I can give another example. One of the projects we're funding at the moment is a local women-led enterprise called Makuru Clean Cook Stoves in Kenya, and they're producing all of their cook stoves locally from recycled materials. So there are a number of companies that are looking into this. Also companies that you know, do more assembly locally So they might source some parts from China or from other places, but they assemble locally. And then they also have the technical skills to more easily do repair and maintenance, which can help maintain the longitude or life. You didn't like life for products, Jeff, but the life of the product.
Yeah. My teacher in this, Bill McDonough, who developed the Cradle to Cradle protocol, always slaps me on the hand when I say that products live. They only are used and they have a second use. But,
exactly. Some of the other areas that more can be done, I think, is waste to energy, generating more energy from especially municipal waste, agricultural waste, of course, but also municipal waste. And we're seeing some of that with biogas systems that are able to take a wide range of products that used to be considered waste and generate energy in communities. And we see partnerships, some public-private partnerships developing between that, where the municipality provides the waste, the company generates the energy, and then the energy is used to power the local health clinics, schools, and other municipal buildings. So that's a really interesting area that can be developed. I mentioned e-transport before. If we have more e-mobility, you're going to reduce your carbon footprint of bringing goods to market, bringing food to market, and other products to market. And then e-waste, as you said, is a very key issue. EEP Africa had a joint webinar with CLASP, which has been mentioned earlier. It's an organization key in this area, to present sort of the Global Leap Awards and some of the other work they're doing to our portfolio of companies, because many of them just weren't aware of where there was recycling opportunities in their country. And we actually see some of our portfolio companies that are doing other work, such as solar home systems, taking this on. So we have one solar home systems company in Zimbabwe called Zoneful that saw the problem of battery storage. It was too expensive to return them to the manufacturer for recycling. So faulty batteries or expended batteries were just being stored in a dangerous way. And so they are now in the process of creating a recycling center in Zimbabwe as a sort of side part of their business. So I think these are some of the areas that we can do more in.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy. Maybe e-mobility as a service as well here. Some good examples though with local manufacturing and assembly and the waste to energy story. So a final question for all the panelists. Maybe we can keep it put it into a short reaction so we can get on to the questions from the audience. Final question is, how has COVID-19 affected your sector? Has it made you think differently about how to build off-grid appliance markets, or how they can help to address climate change and meet sustainable development goals? And circling back to you again, Tracy.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, COVID has had a big impact on the clean energy sector. We actually happened to be doing our annual survey of our project developers in May and June of this year. So just 2 months into when many of these countries started to shut down and borders were closed and curfews were put in place and businesses were forced to curtail operations. And it was quite disturbing to find that, maybe because we found many early stage companies, that over 50% had only sufficient liquidity to last about 4 months, they estimated. And so, we may see a consolidation a bit in the sector as a result of this. Some of the companies were able to register as essential services if they generated energy, especially, and then they provided appliances in addition. So they were able to continue operating despite lockdowns in their countries. We saw that more established companies that already had customers actually did better than we expected. We were afraid that many of them would see significant revenue loss, but I think one of the other speakers already mentioned that the demand for energy was kept up despite many businesses closing, and the realization of the need for these off-grid energy sources and the value of them maybe was reinforced by this pandemic, and so people were willing to pay if they could continue to pay for the services. The companies that were just starting out or trying to introduce a new product to market, where you need to do a lot of consumer awareness and you need to convince people that the appliance is worthwhile switching to, that this is better than their diesel generator or their appliance that they've been using with a generator. And that those upfront costs of making that switch are important. That's been much harder to do, obviously, in this. So that's impacted those products. But we saw, I can just say one example, some household biodigesters for smallholder farms that could create energy and fertilizer for the farm from agricultural waste and manure. We spoke to some of the sales agents who said they felt reinvigorated to sell their product because they saw how incredibly valuable their product was for these smallholder farmers who were now not supposed to leave their farms or had difficulty, and that they had their energy source and could maintain their livelihood and their lifestyle during this COVID crisis. And so they felt really reinvigorated that their product was benefiting lives in a very concrete way. So that was motivating for some people in the sector. So that's a positive maybe that's come out.
Yeah. Habiba, going to you with that question, maybe a short response.
What was the question again?
Sorry. How has COVID-19 affected your sector? Has it made you think differently about how to build off-grid appliance markets or how they can help to address climate change and meet sustainable development goals?
Okay, so basically COVID has actually affected, in the beginning of the lockdown, everything shut down and everyone had to go home, and there was no opportunity to, one of the biggest ways it affected us was we were just at the verge of starting deployment of a certain solution for a mini grid in a community, and it meant like we couldn't do anything anymore. And we also had products that were supposed to be shipped in, and all of the whole craziness of the uncertainty and not knowing what's going on stalled the shipment. And so most of the projects that we were supposed to start or implement were delayed by about 4 months minimum, and some are even like up to 6 months of delay currently. So we're actually seeking for a lot of we're pivoting, our own way of pivoting is seeking extension for most of our work that we're doing. And another thing that was good in the beginning was as soon as the lockdown was announced, there was because we do some pay-as-you-go solutions as well, and we have mini grids in communities where they pay for energy on a monthly basis. That recharge period, the recharge spiked. A lot of people were paying like for energy for 2 months, for people who were not paying before started resuming payments, and it was good. I was so happy that at least we were sitting at home and some funds were coming into the account. But I think with time, when people began to realize that it was going to be a long thing, people preferred to use their money to buy food than to buy energy. They could somehow manage something, and there was a huge drop in revenue for us in the office and all of that. And so for the sector as a whole, and from listening to what my colleagues in the space have said, some of the things that happened, some people were lucky, some companies were lucky, they were doing work for state governments for maybe emergency isolation centers. They were putting up solutions in such centers. We tried to do some in our state here, but I don't know, the state, I think, was still not very sure if they wanted to go solar or they wanted to restrict themselves to generator. And at that point, being an emergency situation, I think most states were really leaning on generators more than solar. And so we actually looked at other opportunities to seek revenue to do solutions like that. We tried the PAOP grant, which we didn't get after all, but it actually made ensured that most of us were set back by months. But the good thing about the resumption in mid-July, was that we were able to also start work immediately. And we are currently in the office. Unlike, I know a lot of people are still working from home. We're able to work in the office. We're able to visit the communities. And the good thing about having agent network working in these communities is that during the COVID downtime, we could actually send out messages to our customers, advice. We were getting messages from our development partners, like the DFID project we were doing, the USADF project we were doing. They were sending us, like guidelines on how to manage COVID, and we were also able to send that out through our agent network to the communities. And as soon as we resumed, some of these organizations supported us to do things like hand sanitizers, face masks, and all of that. So we could also deploy that to these communities and just show them that we also feel their pain and understand that they may have not been able to do this by themselves if we're not there. Going forward, I don't know. I think that I'm seriously one of those people who is hoping that everything stabilizes and we don't have situations like COVID again, because it's really very challenging in this situation where people have had their pays cut down, people are losing jobs, and priority is not to have energy. And unfortunately, in Nigeria, energy prices have really gone up recently. The government has done a new tariff exercise where you have staggered price payments and all of that. So people are also, it's a good thing because people are now looking more closely at alternative energy, people who can afford it, but then the majority of the people cannot afford. And so we really need this to find a balance of how do we live with this situation so that we can continue deploying solutions that we're deploying and ensuring that people get what they want at the time that they need it. Energy-wise.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's shocking. I think I heard it from the 60 decibels report that some people are skipping their meals because they have to watch their money and cash flow. So initially, increase of energy use or the appreciation for the biodigester, but it's just shocking to hear these kinds of reports as well. Returning to Dan to respond to the question.
Thanks, Jeffrey. And I already obviously touched on this, so just to say something different from the last intervention is that as the COVID health crisis increasingly becomes a COVID economic crisis, some governments around the world are thinking about how to stimulate flagging economies, and some regional and international financial institutions are also thinking about that. And so for our program, we have been looking at what the opportunities are for public intervention in order to stimulate these flagging markets. And a couple of examples that I give you, the importance of cooling for the agricultural sector, as has been mentioned, with cold storage hubs and then cold chains to get food from hubs to markets, is one obvious area where value can be enhanced. And if farmers can gain access to more cold storage hubs and cold chains, then that may help them in difficult economic times. And then, historically, it was fairly popular in some countries to do sort of cash for clunker type programs where people could get rid of their old car and upgrade to a newer, cleaner, more efficient one. Now, why can't we apply that kind of approach to getting rid of the stock of pretty crappy air conditioners that exist out there in the world, or thinking about incentive programs for consumers, off-grid consumers, whether that's VAT reductions or other ways of stimulating the market so that consumers can get products that give them the energy services and the wider benefits that consumers need, because it's just not all about cash for clunkers. There tend to be some industries that heavily dominate and do well when these economic challenges arise, and others that aren't maybe seen quite as sexy as buying a car, but actually quite critical for human needs and comfort and prosperity.
Thanks, Dan. And then finally to you, Joni, and then we'll go on to some questions from the audience.
Thanks, Jeffrey. I think just wanted to emphasise the key point that the first wave of the virus has substantially intensified the need for an urgent global transition to clean cooking solutions. Here at MEX, we are working closely with collaborators across all areas of the sector to raise the profile of clean cooking in COVID recovery plans in the international arena. Despite growing recognition of the importance of clean cooking, it is getting pushed off political agendas because economic recovery and investment in health centres are typically getting prioritised. We are experiencing the deepest economic recession in decades due to the first wave of the virus. One impact of this is that a greater proportion of the world's most vulnerable people are using dirty fuels to cook with, so raising the profile of a shift to clean cooking is critical. The virus has exerted multiple negative impacts on the world's most vulnerable communities. In addition to direct health and mortality impacts, the virus has intensified gender inequality, extreme poverty, increased the vulnerability of communities to the impacts of the climate crisis, and set back progress towards achieving Sustainable Development Goal 7, access to modern energy for all. Using dirty fuels to cook with increases the risk of non-communicable diseases due to increased exposure to household air pollution, which in turn increases vulnerability to viruses such as COVID. Here at MEX, Ed Brown and Simon Batchelor have recently published a working paper which argues that an intersectional response to modern energy cooking solutions is imperative for resilient and equitable recovery plans. By implementing an integrated response to COVID-19 recovery plans, which incorporate a nexus of cooking, health, energy, environment, and gender, we can ensure that we employ an effective strategy with multiple gains, which will empower women by freeing up time, usually spent collecting firewood, and therefore enabling women to take up employment, improve the health of women and children, and improve the environment by reducing air pollution and deforestation. The working paper is available for download from the MEX website, so we would encourage you to read more detail into the strategy that is presented.
Great. Thanks so much for all your reactions. So I'm going to go now to some questions from the audience. Thanks for your patience. I should have started this earlier, but wanted the panelists to get their say in all the answers, the questions that I had. So one of the questions that I have here is from Jeremy. Can synergies between vaccine distribution and small cold storage be exploited effectively, with vaccine investment being spent on kits that can also serve as food storage later? So who would like to take that question? Seems like a sort of a, let's think about longer term emergency relief response than just the one-off vaccine cooling. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, very quickly, and I'm not an engineer. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I'm not an engineer. So from what I understand, the short answer to that question is yes, and good for you for sort of thinking ahead, beyond the COVID crisis. That cold storage can work for both sort of health purposes and for agriculture, but yeah, in operationalizing the use of that cold storage, one has to take into consideration how often a door is opened and closed to get a certain produce out. Certain things need to be kept at a different temperature to something else. So it's not likely, from what I've heard, that everything can just quite simply go in the same box. But if you're actually creating a refrigerated unit and it has different compartments that have thermostats for different temperatures and are opened and closed at different times, then actually, yeah, we can think about these two things together. And in a way, kind of stupid, somebody painted me a picture of, here come these Westerners with all their aid projects, and you go to the village and over there is the fridge for the medicine, and over there is the fridge for the produce, and that one's got the so-and-so sticker on it, and that one's got the so-and-so sticker on it, proud to have sponsored this and not thought about joining it up at all. So great question.
Next question is from Ali Habib. Can someone give examples of government regulations to allow solar mini-grids, as it involves electricity distribution beyond private households? Maybe Habiba, you'd like to react to that? Or someone else?
Okay, so one thing that I would like to say, there's a lot of regulations out there. I'll speak about Nigeria, for example. One of the things that the government is now currently, it's like the hype, what something is going on in the Nigerian electricity or energy sector generally, is that the government is now looking very closely into deploying solutions to answer to our energy poverty through renewables. And that's what I can speak to. And they've actually shown that this is priority to them by actually involving themselves in a lot of programs starting, I mean, in a couple of years back. There's one of the things that's big is the $350 million thing, fund that we got from the World Bank to deploy solutions and in renewable energies, and that was channeled towards the Nigerian Energy Program, the NEP, through the performance-based grant of deploying what you call the mini grids in communities, the output-based grant of SHS, and the IMAS, the Integrated Mini Grid Acceleration Scheme, and the Mini Grid Acceleration Scheme. So there's a lot of programs like that, because the government is planning that what they had said about, and this was I think in 2010 or something, they had the plan that by the year 2030, 30% of Nigerian energy should be generated from renewable energies. So there's that kind of policies and regulations already. And then we have a lot of regulatory bodies in Nigeria managing the energy sector, and I can only speak for Nigeria really. We've got the Nigerian Energy Management, and which the acronym is NEMSA. There's Nigerian Electricity and Regulatory Commission. These are the people that are responsible for checking to ensure that you get the right licenses before you can generate energy and deploy. There's the NEMSA checks the guidelines if you're meeting the guidelines to ensure that your solutions are actually top notch and are meeting. They are not the ones that are going to actually be a problem to people instead of being a solution after all. So there's a lot of things across board. The Energy Commission is the one responsible for the research of energy solutions and all of that. So there's always one regulation or the other and it differs from government to government, I think. I hope that answers his question.
Yeah, I could maybe
Tracy, I think she wants.
Yeah, sorry. I could just maybe add, I think the African Mini Grid Developers Association, AMDA, recently released a report, State of the Mini Grids in Africa. And I believe, if I'm not misquoting, that they said on average it can take up to 50 weeks to get through the regulatory process for a mini grid, which is just an incredible burden on developers in bringing the solution to rural communities. So I think we've seen in our among our portfolio developers that regulatory issues is consistently ranked as one of the largest barriers to expansion and scale up of business. So I think this is an issue that needs to be worked on more. And as Habiba was said, as more countries integrate renewable off-grid sources into their national energy plans, making sure that there is a plan for if the grid expands, how that will affect mini grid developers that have already built in that region, and making sure that there's alignment across the sector.
Tracy, a quick question for you from Ola Abraham. EEP works in East Africa. Is there equivalent for West Africa, particularly Nigeria?
I'm not sure. Maybe Habiba knows the best finance in Nigeria. Yeah, we are currently in East and Southern Africa in 15 countries, hosted and managed by the Nordic Development Fund, but also with funding from the governments of Finland and Austria, and that's the target region for us. I don't know for sure which would be the best financiers for Nigeria. I apologize.
I think what the person really wanted to know if you work in Nigeria at all, but yeah. I know I've followed EEP's work, and I know you work in only East Africa and Southern Africa, but there are other kinds of organizations that actually do work in Nigeria. So maybe if you look into it, I mean, USADF is big here, USAID is big here. There are other smaller organizations that also do a lot of work in the energy access space in Nigeria. Of course, Nigeria is pretty volatile, and a lot of people like look at it from a distance and are filled with trepidation. But yeah, I think it's also worth exploring.
The next question before we start to wrap up is from Eric Reynolds. Hi, Eric. Nice to see you on the questions. Is there any country in Africa that will meet the SDG 7 by 2030? And if so, which one and how? So question to all the panelists or any of the panelists, if we'll meet the 2030 goals. Anyone dare to?
Yeah,
Dan?
I hesitate to say this, not being an African expert from Africa, although I have had the privilege to visit many beautiful countries in Africa, so I'll say that first. I mean, Rwanda is taking a really strong leadership position on energy and the SDGs. They're hosting the Kigali Amendment to the Montreal Protocol. I know they're keen to host the COP when it comes to Africa next year. If I were to put my money, and I'm not a betting man, on a country in Africa, it would probably be Rwanda.
Okay, well, I have to wrap up because it's now 1 minute past the webinar's time. I just want to thank the panelists first and foremost, and also thank the audience for tabling many different questions that we weren't able to answer, and apologies for that. we will circulate a recording of this event within the next few days. If you have any burning questions yet, please try to reach out to us. Thank you very much as well to the Efficiency for Access Coalition, the Secretariat, which exists, which basically is run by CLASP and Energy Savings Trust. So a big thank you to them. It's a great resource to check out. That's it for now. I'm looking for guidance from our moderator, Sarah, to wind things up.
Thanks,
because
everyone.
I'm not in control here.
Thank you, everyone. I'll just close it now. Thanks, Jeffrey. Thanks, everyone, for attending.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.